Hello. During the past 2 weeks, we at The Informer have been stridently critical of Premier Daniel Andrews' handling of this COVID pandemic. But we have also been most resolute in our criticism because we believe from day one that Premier Andrews had been misled by both his advisors and his senior ministers, and we said so from the very beginning. In fact, we still can't believe just how they've conducted themselves. Now, in many ways, we almost feel sorry for the Premier. Just imagine how hard it is to manage what is this extraordinarily difficult crisis. Think about it. There's no rule book that exists on how to handle this situation. Nothing has been written by anyone on just what to do. And it's been made even more difficult by the incompetence of some of those that surround the Premier. That makes it extraordinarily difficult. Daniel Andrews relies on key trusted advisors and his ministers to help him steer a steady course, because like the Titanic's Captain Edward Smith that we mentioned just last week in our editorial, he too had executive officers that helped him run the ship. But we know now what happened to that vessel. When the Premier's key ministers and advisors and his chief health officer failed to do their job, in fact, the advice they offered was flawed, well, then in turn, that made it nigh on impossible to arrive at the right decision. And it made governing extremely challenging for the Premier. Now, in that moment, in that situation, Daniel Andrews simply can't win. However, he must also take some responsibility for not recognising or failing to act when he needed to on the incompetence of the ministers. Our belief is, regardless of just how hard we see the Premier trying, he must accept that he failed by not acting to sack Wynne, Mikakos and Sutton. All of them contributed to the government's grand failures. Now at The Informer, we pride ourselves on getting things right, which makes our decision to criticise the Premier and actually challenge him over the government's bungling of COVID-19 the proper course of action. And that has been reflected in the Premier's announcement just last Sunday to make it mandatory for all Melburnians to wear masks when outside. Now, The Informer was right to call on the Premier to be more decisive in order to protect all Victorians. We called out for it, we got it right, and that was ahead of any other media outlet. Each week, we've been prepared to nail our colours to the mast because we believe it was only right to be that strident. It was that important. No other media outlet sought to call out the Premier in the manner that The Informer did. And we also offered up a strategy that we believe would go quite some way to helping contain the spread of COVID-19. And more importantly, to help prevent a stage 4 lockdown, which would imprison all Melburnians. We at The Informer are content to know that we might have played a part in helping to change the government's mind and make it mandatory for all Melburnians to wear a mask when outdoors. In fact, from day one of this crisis, as I've said before, our brief at The Informer has been to be as clear and decisive about what we believe in and what the Premier's strategy should be. And we also chose not to enter into a philosophical debate around elimination versus suppression of the virus, because quite frankly, that debate has passed. Now, while there's no vaccine, in a country of 25 million, we can't eliminate the COVID threat. We must learn to live and deal with it. The experts keep telling us that. People who've been there before. And again, at The Informer, we play our part. We will be clear. And unlike so many platforms or outlets these days that pander to their favourites or try to appease others, we will do what we believe is the best thing for the community and for our constituents, our viewers. If we adopt that belief, then we can influence the decision makers. And we know the Premier has been listening. And we also know that our editorials have made an impact. Some of you have been critical of how hard we have been in our criticism of Daniel Andrews, but the majority of you have heard and seen that our criticism has been fair and warranted. I believe we've been justified in our strong stance, and as of midnight last night, the Premier honoured the Informer's position by enforcing a mandatory wearing of masks. Mr Andrews should be applauded for taking the stand and enforcing compulsory mask wearing, because the advice he was receiving had proved to be not only useless, but was failing all Victorians. Thank you, Mr Premier, for making the right call. And we understand your job is a tough one, no doubt about it, but it would have been even tougher if you had continued with the strategy that had been recommended by Mikakos, Sutton and Wynne. Let's not forget that during an extremely difficult 6 months of your premiership, it's pretty fair to say that your performance at times had been flawless, but at other times it's also been flawed. You have shown what it is to be a great leader. Your decision to impose mandatory mask wearing is a sign that you're also a leader who's prepared to listen and acknowledge others. After all, that's what separates the greats from the rest and the also-rans. They listen and they learn. You well understand that a move to stage 4 lockdown was not the right way to go. People's lives and their livelihoods are not to be toyed with. Acknowledging a long-term game plan is infinitely more appropriate than making a knee-jerk reaction. When that happens, nobody wins. Not the economy, not our collective mental health, nor the continuity of our day-to-day existence. Victoria and Victorians must not be treated like yo-yos. Learn to live with COVID until we have a vaccine. That seems to be more and more every day the message that we need to understand. To do otherwise would be a disaster. Again, thank you, Mr Premier, for adopting a common sense and logical approach to what has been a pretty vexed issue. We appreciate that you've been listening. And just before I finish, even though many testing sites for COVID-19 are being held near shopping centres, that doesn't mean you can go shopping after testing. It means go home and isolate till your results come through.